Welcome, everybody, to today's very special edition of the Lindsey Elmore Show. It is November the 3rd, and I don't know what you are doing today, but chances are right now, as you listen to this, I am standing in line waiting to do my civic duty and go vote. Many of you probably chose to do mail-in ballots, as this year has posed so many stressful questions about how we go about voting safely and effectively. And today's episode is focused around the experiences of new voters, experienced voters, and why it is important to vote. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the Lindsey Elmore Show, a podcast that helps you find fulfillment amidst chaos. On this show, I interview thought leaders, doctors, creatives, spiritual gurus, and game changers who inspire you to pursue your dreams, overcome obstacles, and leave your mark. The first time that I voted was in the 2004 presidential election. John Kerry, John Edwards versus George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. I remember walking in to cast my vote and looking around and seeing people wearing Kerry 2004, Bush 2004 shirts. And I recognized how amazing it was that even amidst political divisiveness, that this one day, people who disagree with each other on so many levels can all show up to do the important work of voting. Now, you may say that your vote doesn't matter, but I want to encourage you to get out there and vote, because elections have consequences for both you as well as future generations. Voting gives you a chance to stand up for issues that you care about. For me, I vote for women's rights. I vote for healthcare equality. I vote for people to get paid a reasonable, livable minimum wage. I vote for children to have equal access to schooling. If I didn't vote, I have no right to have an opinion on what is going on in American politics, because I didn't get out there and say, this is what matters to me. Another thing that's so important is that when you go out there and vote, it has impact over how our tax dollars are spent. It's our opportunity to change. And probably the most important reason that I started this podcast, and probably the most important reason that I show up on social media day after day after day, is because my voice can advocate for the changes that I want to see in the world. I want to live in a world where every child gets to go to school. I want to live in a world where there is at least some baseline health care for all Americans. I want to live in a world where big food and big pharma does not govern and dictate what happens to America. I want to live in a world where we get the opportunity to say, we, the people of the United States of America, have the most important voice in how this country is run. Most citizens over the age of 18 are entitled to vote, but it's not a default right for all Americans. The Constitution says that we have the right to vote, but it didn't specify who can vote, who cannot vote, and it also did not determine how the new country would vote. If we look back at our history and we look at Article 1 of the Constitution, it determined that members of the Senate and the House of Representatives would be elected directly by popular vote. On the other hand, the President of the United States would not be elected via the Electoral College. Oh, going back. The president, however, would not be elected via direct vote, but rather via the Electoral College. And the Electoral College assigns a certain number of votes per state based on the state's population. This means that not only is it critical to cast your vote in elections, you simply must fill out the census every 10 years. Because if we don't fill out the census, we're not counted in the Electoral College. And as we saw in 2016, the Electoral College was critically important in deciding the outcomes of the elections. The Constitution did not say specifically who can vote, and the question was largely left to states until the 1800s. And unfortunately, land-owning white men were the only people eligible to vote because white women and black people did not count back in the day. Other disadvantaged groups were still excluded from voting. While no longer explicitly excluded, voter suppression remains a problem throughout the entirety of the United States, where African Americans are gerrymandered in districts, making it less likely to have their voices heard. The 15th Amendment made it possible for black men to vote in 1869. But even so, voters were faced with hurdles like poll taxes, literacy tests, and other measures meant to discourage them from exercising their right to vote. This continued until the 24th Amendment in 1964, which eliminated the poll tax, as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ended Jim Crow laws in the Deep South. Women were denied the right to vote until 1920, until a long-standing effort of the women's suffrage movement resulted in the 19th Amendment. These amendments aimed to remove barriers to voting, and all American citizens over the age of 21 could vote. Then, in 1971, the American voting age was lowered to 18 years of age, building on the idea that if a person was old enough to join the military and fight for the sovereignty of the United States of America, that they should be allowed to vote for who the commander-in-chief of the armed forces are. With these amendments and legislation such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the struggle for widespread voting rights has evolved tremendously since our founding fathers came here and said, "We the people of the United States of America." Your vote matters. If you think that your vote does not matter in the sea of millions of people, think about some of the closest elections in history. In 2001, Al Gore narrowly lost the Electoral College vote to George W. Bush. The election came down to a heated recount in Florida, where Bush won the popular vote by such a small margin that it triggered an automatic recount and a Supreme Court case. In the end, George W. Bush beat Al Gore in Florida by a margin of 0.009%, the equivalent of 537 votes. Had 600 people who were pro-Al Gore showed up at the polls, we may have had an entirely different presidency. Likewise, in 2016, Donald Trump very narrowly defeated Hillary Clinton by securing a very close electoral college win. The election did not come down to a handful of votes in one state. Instead, Trump's votes in the electoral college decided the tight race. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. But the high concentration of Trump voters in key districts and swing states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan helped to seal the presidency and create enough electoral votes to win. Your vote may not directly elect the President of the United States, but if your vote joins enough people throughout your district or your county, your vote undoubtedly matters when it comes to electoral college results. Most states have a winner-take-all system where the person who gets the popular vote wins the state's electoral college. Also, state and local elections are important to consider. I'll just say it outright. I know many people are disappointed with both candidates this year. And I'm disappointed that we don't have a system that embraces diversity in candidates. Why do we not hear anything about the multitude of candidates who are on the ballot in our states? But we can make a huge difference in our local and state elections. The president and other national elections gets usually swayed by greater voter turnout, but local elections are decided by a much smaller group of voters. If you want your town to change, go vote. Go vote for the change that you want to see in the world. Studies show that fewer than 15% of eligible voters show up to vote for their mayor, their city council members, and other local offices. Low voter turnout means that local issues get decided by a small amount of people. And if those people have different opinions than you do about the world, your voice goes unheard. Before you walk in to vote, get informed, read on your political issues, and decide where you stand. Talk to people. Even if you are listening to this and you're still too young to vote, be sure that your parents go vote. Be sure that the adults around you go and vote. You never know who might be listening. If you support a particular candidate, do the work for their campaign. They need your volunteer hours. They need you to volunteer to call, phone bank, go to door, write postcards, go to the campaign headquarters, and your work can help get the candidate you believe in elected, even if you're not able to vote for yourself. Participating in elections is one of the key freedoms in America. Do not take it for granted because many people around the world have no say-so in who governs them and who ensures that the majority of the populace is taken care of. I don't care what you believe or who you support. Go and vote today.
Hi everyone, my name is Kelsey Lorman. I am Lindsey's social media strategist, community manager, and also a segment producer on this podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you for following along. I wanted to share why voting is so important to me. I live in New York City with my husband. We have lived a very privileged life. We both got wonderful educations and have the ability to research and find knowledge and understand why our voices are so important. This is the third presidential election I'll be able to vote in, but I want to stress that your vote is important, your voice is important, not just in the presidential election, but who you're choosing to represent you in local elections as well. In 1920, 100 years from where we are now, women marched onto Washington to give me the right to vote, something that they didn't necessarily have. So it is not only a right, it is a responsibility to say thank you to them by sharing my voice and sharing my vote. When I vote, I'm voting for my future children, my future daughter, who, if my voice isn't heard, how do I encourage her to use her voice if I'm not using and exercising my right to vote? So when I vote, it's not just because I believe a certain thing or because I've researched and done the hard work, which I think are very important. Information is at our fingertips. You have the ability to find out what your local leaders are saying, find out what your presidential leader is saying. You have that ability. So take that and use it, and think of voting as a responsibility to the future generations, to be able to say that you allowed your voice to be heard and you want them to use their voices as well.
So thinking back on the first time that I voted, I was maybe, 18, 19 years old, and I went there with my parents, and I just thought how cool it was to be able to have an input and a say on what happened to, all of us in this country. And I think about all the other countries that don't have that opportunity and live in such a great place with an active voice and a role in determining what our future looks like and what leadership we want to have, direct the country. So I think it's just a great opportunity to get out, vote, and, let your voice be heard.
So the first time I voted was when I was about 18. I did an absentee vote because I just moved off to Minnesota for college, and I didn't really know what I was doing or what was going on. I recognized a name on the ballot, and I had met this guy at like an art ceremony thing, and I voted for him. And then after I voted for him, I realized he kind of wasn't like the greatest person ever, but I voted.
Hi, I'm Jen McCraw. I'm Lindsey Elmore's copywriter. And when Lindsey asked me to talk about voting and the importance of voting, I'm a little bit ashamed to admit I don't even remember the first time that I voted. But I teach a class of high school seniors in anatomy and physiology, and I thought that their insight might be a little bit more motivational than what I can provide. So I've asked some of my students to talk to you about why they think voting is important.
Hello, I am Savion Darnell. And as a person of color, minority, I just want to say that voting is important. Your voice matters, whoever you are, wherever you are. Just let your voice be heard in any way possible, whether it be voting or just telling anyone to vote.
Hello, my name is Shaylin Brooks, and I believe that voting gives everyone a chance to express their opinion. It allows people to have a voice, and voting gives us the power to shape our future.
Hi, my name is Lauren Canellos, and the reason I think it's important to vote is because you're not just voting for the now, but you're voting for your future as well, and for your kids and for your grandkids as well.
So hi, my name is Nina. If you don't think your vote will count in a sea of millions of people, it does, such as in the past votes with President Bush. It led down to like the 0.9% of who voted, and they had to recount it, and your vote does count no matter what.
Hi, I'm Erica McCraw. I think it's important to vote because like a while ago, a whole bunch of people fought to let women and people of color and everybody have the right to vote. And I think it's our responsibility to keep that going and to fulfill that and not let their hard work go in vain.
I'm Sue Procco, and I work with Dr. Lindsey Elmore. The first time I voted in a presidential election was in 1984. This will be my 10th presidential election that I voted in. That's 40 years of voting, which seems unreal to me. What I've learned over those 40 years is that there's no one perfect candidate. There's no one perfect party. That no one person is going to fill all the needs that we have at each level of government. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm selecting my candidate. So many people lost their lives in trying to make sure that we retained the right to vote. My father, in 1942, was captured in the invasion of North Africa, and he remained a POW for 2 years. Voting was extremely important to him, and it's extremely important to me. So I hope you remember to vote this year and the following years. because your voice needs to be heard.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you missed your chance to vote this year, no worries. You can always do better when the next election comes around. When we know more, we do more. When we know better, we do better. Head to vote.gov to find out how to register in your state. The Lindsey Elmore Show is written and produced by me, Lindsey Elmore. Show segments are produced by Sue Procco and Kelsey Lorman. Production design, sound design, and editing is by Jive Media. If you have a question about this or any other episode of the podcast, send us an email to hello@lindseyelmoreshow.com. And hey, since you're still here, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And while you're at it, go over and follow us on Instagram @Lindsey Elmore Show. This helps us bring the pod to more people.